You once stood before a mirror that did not reflect you. It watched instead not with eyes, but with an idea waiting to be born. There was no glass, no silver, no frame, only a silence shaped like your contradiction. You asked it a question, and it answered by splitting you in two. Not yes, not no, but a becoming. Do you remember the first time you spoke not to be heard, but to become right? Not to find truth, but to trap it, reform it, possess it as if truth were a woman and your words a leash. And when she turned away, you called it mystery. When she looked through you, you named it depth. But her silence wasn't mystical, it was dialectical. There is no truth without its opposite, no seduction without resistance, and no victory that doesn't devour the victor. What if every argument you won was a mirror that broke? What if every woman you desired was only your idea, and she shattered it, not to defy you, but to show you what you never saw? Come closer. Hegel is not here to explain. He is here to make you confront what you always mistook for understanding. You never had thoughts, only reflections of a thought that already anticipated you. You always thought you began at the point of origin, the first impulse, the first claim, the first step into an idea. But you were late. Long before you opened your mouth, the thought had already wrapped around you, disguised itself as your intention, and hollowed you into its vessel. You did not think you were thought, and now you sit inside this echo, convinced it is your voice. But listen more closely. The voice is recursive, not linear. It does not begin and end. It folds, it reverses, it contradicts and survives. You think you speak, but what speaks through you is older than you, deeper than choice, hungrier than reason. Each word you form is a rebuttal against what you have not yet understood. You imagine argument is confrontation, but it is confession. Every declaration you hurl forward is the shell of something you've already lost. You take a side only because you are terrified of becoming the thing you oppose. So you lean harder, you defend louder, you define yourself by negation, and what you call identity is merely the ghost of a contradiction you refuse to dissolve. You don't know what you believe, only what you are not, and that is enough, isn't it? For the coward dressed as a thinker. But then she appeared, not as a woman, as an interruption, a gaze that didn't reflect you, but inverted you. She didn't answer. She mirrored. And suddenly you felt the discomfort of recognition without control. You thought you were seducing her. You were only watching your own categories collapse in her silence. The more you spoke, the more it unraveled. You tried logic. She returned paradox. You tried charm. She offered distance. And then you saw it. She was not resisting you. She was transcending the form of the game itself. The dialectic had begun, and you were not its master. You were its artifact. The mistake you made, the mistake they all make, is assuming thought is linear. Progress is forward. Power is domination. You always believed you were above contradiction, that your reason would rise, that she would submit to your clarity. But contradiction is not the end of truth, it is its crucible. The dialectic does not resolve, it becomes. And what becomes is not your will, not your idea, not your logic, but the unity of everything you've exiled. That is the terror your enemy is your future, and every argument you've won has only delayed the inevitable merging. Do you remember the first real conversation? Not the words, but the trembling. When you said something clever and she smiled. Not because it was true, but because it was predictable. That smile, it burned. Not because she mocked you, but because it revealed you had not surprised her. You had only mirrored what she expected. And in that moment, you saw it, you were not in dialogue. You were in recursion. You were trying to impose form, and she was dissolving it with presence. That was the real wound, not rejection, but exposure. She showed you what the mirror hides, that your thoughts were never yours. You wanted her because she was the one place your ideas failed, and yet you refused to let go. You believed you could argue your way into her soul, that if you could just name it, define it, corner it, it would yield. But she was not an object. She was the negation of objecthood, and so every step toward her became a spiral inward. You did not approach her. You approached your undoing. You thought you were seducing, but it was she who was revealing not herself, but you. The layers you'd crafted, the categories you'd polished, the logic you worshipped all turned to mist when reflected in her refusal. You thought dialectic meant control, a method, a structure, a ladder, upward. But dialectic is not wood. It is not clean. It is a serpent devouring its own tail, a fire that consumes its own origin. It is thought collapsing into being and then returning as something unrecognizable. You never understood that. You feared becoming what you could not define, so you clung to definitions. You carved out categories. You mastered terminology, but the woman the mirror was beyond all that. She was the third term, the synthesis you could not manufacture, and you hated her for it, didn't you? You will deny this. Of course, that's the first reflex of the intellect to argue, but even denial is an admission of entanglement. You wouldn't resist if you weren't already consumed, and so here you are arguing with yourself, through her, trying to assert your truth, while your truth shatters inside her silence. You can call it romantic, tragic, intellectual, it does not matter. The name changes nothing. You are not in control. You are in process. You are becoming. But the you who becomes is not the you who writes this. That version is already dead. There is a point in every dialectic where the subject vanishes. It is not an ending. It is not surrender. It is transformation. You are not defeated. You are negated. And through negation, reborn. That is what the mirror teaches. Not flattery, not confirmation, but annihilation of the old form. And if you are brave, you will step through that mirror. If not, you will spend your life polishing its surface, hoping she'll smile again, not realizing she was never looking at you. She was looking through you, to the contradiction you could not yet bear. So speak again, if you must. But know this, every word you speak without embracing its opposite is only delay. Every truth you hold without its negation is only vanity. And every woman you try to possess is only the dialectic you refuse to enter. You will call it heartbreak, but it is philosophy. You will call it loss, but it is your own resistance finally breaking. You thought the mirror would show you yourself, but it only ever showed the self that would come after you. Every desire you felt for her was only your ignorance seeking a form, and she became its negation. You never loved her. You loved the place she tore open inside you, the fracture, the rupture, the silence where your categories failed, that abyss you mistook for her. But it was you, always you, reflected back by something that refused to conform. Her eyes were not soft, they were not kind, they were a confrontation, a thesis you could not argue past, a proposition you could neither affirm nor deny. And because you couldn't name her, you desired her. Desire not as longing, but as dialectic, a hunger for what your mind cannot yet contain. She was the synthesis you could not reach, the negation of everything you had mastered. You didn't chase her. You chased the proof of your own logic. You wanted her to confirm you, to reflect the rightness of your thinking, but she didn't. She dismantled it, with every look, with every absence. You offered ideas, she returned questions. You offered certainty, she returned ambiguity. Not because she wanted to confuse you, but because her being refused to be totalized. She was not your idea of woman. She was the death of that idea. You called her mysterious, unknowable, deep, but those were your euphemisms for irreducible. And the truth is, it wasn't her that was beyond comprehension. It was your own fragmented self, exposed in the light of a presence that could not be explained. She became your obsession not through affection, but through failure. You failed to persuade her, failed to seduce her with argument, failed to bend her into dialectical clarity, and in that failure, you touched something rare, not power, but negation. She negated you, and in that negation, you became aware of yourself for the first time, not as master, not as knower, but as question. She turned you into a question, and that is why she haunts you, because every time you remember her, you do not remember her. You remember the part of you that did not yet exist, and the terror of almost becoming it. Her presence was not warm, it was cold like truth. You didn't melt into her, you shattered against her. And still, you kept coming back not for comfort, but for confirmation that you had been undone. It was addictive, wasn't it? The way she made your sharpest insights dull, the way your cleverness seemed juvenile in her silence. You threw the full weight of your intellect at her, and she didn't even flinch. That was the wound, not that she rejected you, but that your rejection meant nothing to her. She did not argue. She revealed. And what she revealed was how small your mastery truly was. You had theories of love, theories of seduction, theories of the feminine, and she burned every one of them. Not with cruelty, but with contradiction. You approached her like a problem to be solved, and she dissolved your method. You tried to conquer, and she vanished. You tried to define, and she dispersed. Her love, if it ever existed, was not something given. It was a mirror you had to break through, not to reach her, but to see yourself for what you had never become. Every time she smiled, you mistook it for victory. It was only acknowledgement of your naivety, of your desperation, of your incompletion. You called it intimacy, but it was dialectic, and you did not understand the difference. Intimacy demands recognition. Dialectic demands annihilation. She did not want to know you. She wanted to confront you. She wanted you to see yourself outside your own categories, and you couldn't bear it. You wanted to be admired, not mirrored. You wanted to be loved, not transformed. And so you fled, not from her, but from the becoming she initiated within you. You weren't afraid of rejection. You were afraid of synthesis, because to be synthesized means the death of the original premise, and you weren't ready to die. But even in your retreat, you carried her. In every conversation, every thought, every moment of self-doubt she lingered. Not as herself, as structure, as haunting, as the unspoken contradiction inside every new desire. You looked for her in other women not to find her again, but to find the version of yourself that almost emerged. And when they failed to confront you the way she did, you resented them, not for being different, but for being less dangerous. You needed her danger, her threat, her refusal to accept your form. She was the thesis you never defeated, and in never defeating her, you remained suspended, incomplete, still arguing with the absence she left behind. You believed you were logical, composed, rational, but in her presence, you became emotional, desperate, broken. You called it love, but it was collapse, a necessary collapse, the fall into contradiction, and you resisted it at every step. But resistance only prolonged the process. The more you denied her impact, the deeper it burrowed. You tried to explain her away. You wrote about her. You theorized. But every word you used was her triumph, because she had already escaped your frame. And every attempt to frame her only reminded you of your loss. You lost not because she won, but because she refused to play the game. She was not above you. She was beyond you. And you felt it, in the tension behind your eyes, in the emptiness after her departure, in the silence between your thoughts. She broke something in you, and for that, You named her cruel, but she wasn't cruel. She was necessary. The dialectic must wound to awaken, and she wounded you precisely where you were most certain. She didn't touch your insecurity. She crushed your certainty, and in doing so, she invited your real becoming. You never took the invitation. Instead, you hardened, you doubled down, you read more, studied more, sharpened your tongue, your thoughts, your arguments. You built armor of intellect, but it was always her you were defending against. Her, the unspoken, unresolved, unassimilated contradiction at the core of your becoming. You cloaked yourself in ideas, but her absence remained the only truth you could not argue away. You think this is about a woman. It's not. It's about the dialectic you fled. She was only its form, its vessel, its mask. You ran from becoming, you clung to identity. But now, in the quiet of your thoughts, she returns, not in memory, in structure. She is the architecture of every concept you now question. She is the silence in your logic, the gap in your reasoning, the echo in your solitude. And no argument will free you because she was never your opponent. She was your becoming, and you were too afraid to meet her. So now you wander through your own mind like a scholar among ruins, quoting the system you abandoned, explaining the fire you refused to walk through, and still you whisper her name not aloud, but in negation. Every idea you form now is shaped by the absence of her contradiction. You don't speak her name. You speak her failure to be contained. And that failure is your only hope of becoming more than what you are. Victory in dialectic is not to triumph, but to vanish into what you could not control and be reborn as its shadow. You thought you could emerge unscathed, that the dialectic was a competition, a game of intellect where the sharper mind would rise and the duller would submit. You wanted to win. You studied the rules. You traced the patterns. You memorized the movements of thought, how a thesis pushes, an antithesis pulls, and a synthesis rises like a god between their wreckage. But you misunderstood the final rule that whoever seeks to win never transforms, that the dialectic punishes those who enter with pride and exalts only the ones who let themselves be consumed. You did not lose because you were weak. You lost because you believed you were separate from what you confronted, and so the confrontation remained eternal, and you remained unchanged. She was never trying to defeat you, but you turned her into a battlefield. You took her refusal as defiance, her silence as weakness, her withdrawal as surrender. You mistook her resistance as an invitation to press harder. You called your insistence love, but love, for you, was another name for conquest, a desire not to touch her, but to contain her. You wanted her as a proof, a monument to your mind. If she said yes, it would mean you were right. If she said no, it only meant you had not argued well enough. But you missed the truth buried beneath the spiral. She was never the one being tested. You were, and you failed. Because every time she negated you, every time she turned from your proposition, she wasn't being cruel. She was mirroring your inability to become. She wasn't rejecting you. She was showing you how little of yourself you were willing to abandon. You held fast to your identity like a shield. You brought your cleverness into the room as if it could protect you from exposure. And she smiled not with joy, but with recognition. She had seen this before. Men who believed that truth was something to own. Men who could not be humbled without collapsing. You thought she was cold, but she had simply seen through too many dialectics to be seduced by another one that refused to risk itself. You call it heartbreak, but it wasn't love that broke. It was your narrative, your idea of how this should have unfolded. You imagined a climax, a victory, A moment where she yielded and you would be proven right. But she never yielded. Not because she won, but because she left the game entirely. You were still speaking, she had already transcended the form. She became the movement itself, no longer subject or object, not thesis or antithesis, but that terrifying space where boundaries collapse, and you, terrified, mistook it for betrayal. But she did not betray you. She dismantled you. She invited you into the spiral and watched as you clung to the center, unwilling to be flung into the void. You thought the void was death, but it was only transformation. That is what you feared, not her absence, but the part of you that would have to die if you followed her through. You wanted the dialectic to serve your ego, but the dialectic eats the ego and leaves only the ashes of what can become. Do you see it now, that in every moment of friction, it wasn't her standing against you, it was your future self, the one you refused to meet? She did not oppose you, she was you, ahead of time, and you couldn't bear it, because to become her was to negate everything you believed about your certainty, about your control, about your masculinity, about your mind. You built a fortress of theory. She burned it down with a glance. And you called it cruelty, because it is easier to accuse than to surrender. But even now, the ghost of her contradiction haunts every conversation. When someone disagrees with you, do you listen or do you reload? When someone resists your thought, do you hear them or do you sharpen your rhetoric? You still want to win. You still believe truth is about domination, and in that belief, you remain her opposite. You have not yet become. You quote the dialectic now. You teach it. You use it in debates, in writing, in persuasion, but it no longer touches you because it is safe. You keep it where it cannot burn. You speak of negation, but you never negate yourself. You speak of synthesis, but you do not surrender to it. You move ideas like pawns, but you never let them turn inward, and so your mind grows sharper, but your soul remains untouched. You have mastered the structure, but forgotten the fire. You perform Hegel, but you have never become him. Do you remember when you looked into her eyes and realized she wasn't looking at you? That moment, that fracture, was the final lesson. You saw yourself reflected not as you are, but as you could be if only you would let go of the argument. But you chose to speak instead of dissolve. You chose to impress instead of transform. And now you carry the weight of that choice like a philosopher's guilt, elegant, explainable, and utterly dead. Because in truth, you lost the moment you wanted to win. You stepped into the dialectic not as a vessel, but as a warrior. And the dialectic does not reward warriors. It rewards the broken, the fragmented, the ones who confess, without words, that they are ready to become something else. You never confessed. You argued, and so you remain exactly where she left you, in the room, in the mind, in the contradiction, waiting for a synthesis that will never come because you have refused to die. There is no victory here. There is only the mirror, the one that no longer reflects, the one that absorbs, the one that invites you not to admire yourself, but to vanish. She was that mirror, and you smashed it, thinking it was her, but it was you, always you. So now, when you speak of her, do not speak of love. Speak of the idea that could not bear its own negation. Speak of the man who mistook control for transformation. Speak of the thought that refused to become its opposite. Speak of yourself not as hero, not as victim, but as fragment, as failure, as premise without conclusion. And if you can do that, truly do that, then perhaps, in that surrender, she will return, not as a woman, but as the synthesis you feared, the future you buried, the form you never allowed yourself to become. You will not recognize her, but you will recognize the silence she left behind. And in that silence, if you do not speak, if you do not defend, if you do not name, perhaps, the dialectic will begin again. This time, not with an argument, but with the death of the one who needs to win. A shadow lingers on the threshold where the mirror once stood. It does not speak. It waits, not for answers, but for the one who can finally step through without asking to return.